Welcome to the Spiritual Principles Made Practical podcast. Today, we're really lucky to have David Kelly. He's somebody who has successfully been supportive of people who are inspired to be leaders in our society and make this a better world by following their inner guidance. And he calls it your inner GPS. And so we're going to learn about David, how he got here, what he does, and how he can help us. So take it away. How did you get to this point, and how do you help people?
All right. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I've been an educator. I always like to say that I started as a banker, turned to educator, and then turned to coach. And how I got here was when I turned 40, I realized that my life was pretty meaningless in terms of how I was living. And so I decided to have a real deep inquiry into what made my life meaningless, right? I just asked that question, where is the meaning? And that just led me down a path of so many different teachers. And the reason I went down that path is because I ended up with a health issue where I had Bell's palsy, paralysis of the face, which is actually not that serious, but it just made me so tired. And it was kind of what the universe did to put me on a timeout and say, got to slow down. You got to change the way you're living. And from that point forward, I really started a deep meditation practice. I started asking a lot of questions. I realized that I actually knew nothing, absolutely nothing, and was really open to, right? Even with all my fancy degrees and my external success, I was like, I really don't know anything. And I ended up, that Bell's palsy was a gift because I ended up taking a pretty long time of absence from my work and would just sit in meditation for hours and hours on end. My family was out of the house from 8 to 5, and sometimes I'd be meditating 5, 6 hours a day and just really asking a lot of questions and finding whatever teacher would show up at that moment. And so that led me to, I think for a lot of us that go down this path, we end up saying, okay, we want to help others. And so I just naturally started during the pandemic. I started putting groups together on Zoom and just asking friends if they wanted to talk about what was going on. And I noticed that I was actually doing fine during the pandemic because I had this real strong inner kind of work that I was doing, but a lot of people were struggling. So a friend of mine in Chicago and we put together an online program, and we ended up having cohorts for 3 years and just really helping people kind of navigate life and figure out how they're going to get through that. I love the title of this podcast, how are you going to get through your day-to-day life by following these spiritual principles that have changed my life.
Well, I bet a lot of people can relate to that because, search for meaning is sort of common to us all, right?
Yes.
And there's, bless you for creating groups, right, that are supportive, because for those of us that are on a spiritual path, the dominant structures in society don't ostensibly support that.
No.
Oh, I mean, some of my early experiences in life have been anger at being so disappointed that the quote unquote conventional wisdom didn't work for me, right? I mean, I went to college, I got a fancy degree, I obeyed all the rules,
Yep.
I was faithful in my marriage, and did all the things you're supposed to do, right? That's supposed to make you happy, and I was miserable.
Same here. Same here. Yep.
It's not working.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so I started going deeper and deeper into spirituality. So because it was the only thing that ended up making sense to me. And now, I look to connect with people like you that can help me make my inspiration practical and comprehensible to people, and so that they can see how to get from their current mindset to something that is a greater contribution to the world, but also practical and functional, right? Because
yes.
So if you want to take me as an example, right? Because I always grab free coaching wherever I can.
I get it.
I have been just inspired. I mean, I've been meditating for 40 years and I've written 13 books and you know, so I've got that side of it pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm having trouble is that I uh, have really I don't know, I'm going to almost say been captured by the idea that we're all one.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
you know, and I was the first time I really became cognizant of it was it's quite a few decades ago.
Hmm.
The prayer of St. Francis when it says, "In dying to self, you're born to eternal life." And I read that and it just grabbed me. And I said, I need to understand what this is. What are they talking about here? I got to know.
Yeah.
And that led me to understand more and more that we're all one and all this. And so I've been saying, okay, you know, I understand pieces of that, like what you do to anybody, you do to yourself.
Yeah.
And we all rise and fall together. And I have all those concepts, but then I look at politics and the world and the dominant mindsets that are allocating resources and stuff. And you know, they're still in the zero sum game.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, you know, and so I'm trying to communicate like, I mean, one of the books I wrote is transitioning from zero sum to win-win thinking, you know, and like most of my books, it went nowhere.
Well, maybe nowhere, but it probably helped you.
It helped. Well, and that's why I keep writing them because they help me. And
Yep.
so, you know, where I've come to is thinking that the best thing I can do for anybody is to work on myself.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I'm doing that. But in the process of accepting myself, I'm trying to put myself out there. So, you know, just in case the world is actually has any interest in what I have to say and what I have to share, that they could find me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's working well in terms of friends and connecting with people and, you know, giving speeches at Toastmasters and stuff.
Yeah.
It's not working well in terms of engaging people that are leaders in our society that are in a position to change the structures of society and the dominant thinking, right? I mean, I one time I wrote a letter once a week to Warren Buffett, and I said, you know, look, you know, you're so highly respected, and if you know, and clearly you know, you're interested in, you know, lifting up the whole because you know, decided to donate a large part of your fortune to charity. You know, I
Yeah.
think just be an example and you know, be public about, you know, how it's enriching your life to lift other people up and stuff because you're so well respected, it would have a great impact on people. And so eventually, and I can every week I'd write another letter that was pretty much in that theme, right? Until
Yeah.
eventually I got a letter back from his assistant that said, "Don't write any more letters."
Well, you got a response.
I mean, I wrote a book, The Dynamics of Global Leadership, and it's all about resonance and dignifying the value that every culture has to offer, and just like every person has a contribution to make that they need to make and the world needs, you know, so does every culture, and if you do
Yeah.
this and you know and stuff. And I really thought that was valuable stuff, and I sent it to everyone in Congress and the president, vice president, everybody. Yeah, well, I got about the same response, you know, as I got Buffett, you know, well, less actually.
Right. Right. Right.
So I mean, so I've got all this inspiration, right?
Hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out how to share it to make it a better world because this is my world and I want my world to be as good as
Yeah.
possible. And so what am I missing?
Mm.
What am I doing wrong? Because there's a lot of people like me, okay,
Yeah.
that feel that they have something of value to contribute. They
Hmm.
want to contribute it, but they, at least I'll speak for myself, um, apparently don't have the communication skills
Right. Right.
to convey the benefits of changing our thinking in these ways.
Yeah.
What do you say to somebody like me? And there are lots of us out there.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. Well, the first question is you said, what am I doing wrong? So that's an
Yeah.
interesting question, right? What am I doing wrong? So where is that coming from? What am I doing wrong?
Well, I feel like I have an uplifting message that if I communicated it effectively, that
Hmm.
other people would go like, yeah, this is what I've been looking for. You know, I absolutely, yeah, no, this makes perfect sense. And
Yeah.
and in my limited circle, I get that response.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm effective at communicating that in a way that people resonate with and value. And
Yeah.
I mean, and friends of mine come and ask me my opinion on things because they think that my point of view has merit and value. And oftentimes they'll take, not always, but oftentimes they'll take my suggestions and it works out for them.
Yeah.
So on this sort of more smaller, more immediate scale. But so the question is okay, how do if I'm communicating that effectively on a one-on-one basis,
Hmm.
and is there something I can do to communicate that to a wider
Yeah.
audience?
Let me ask you this. What do you think would happen if the president, the vice president, all these people that you've been writing to, like what is the outcome that you're desiring?
The outcome that I'm desiring is that they say, look, we're all one, we all rise and fall together. So everyone in this country has a valuable contribution to make, and we all rise and fall together. So we are going to establish an office that evaluates win-win solutions. So please send us the win-win solutions so that we can lift ourselves and everybody up.
Yep.
So nobody gets hurt, right?
Yeah.
Nobody gets disenfranchised at all. It's got to be win-win, right? You can't
Yeah.
be, robbing Peter to pay Paul here, right? And
Yep.
and we will, and I will, dedicate the resources to vet those suggestions
Yeah.
and start implementing the suggestions most likely to succeed.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I would like them to do. Another thing that I'd like them to do is once a week
Hmm.
to interview someone in America that has made a huge achievement, someone that was in poverty, that worked their way out, was a fifth generation welfare recipient who found that their life was so much better, acknowledging their own value and contributing that value and being paid for that value and getting off of welfare, and
Hmm.
what it meant to them and how their thinking had to change to do that.
Yeah.
And from being homeless to being middle class,
Yeah.
as an example. And so those are things that I think that I would love to see the president and vice president do.
Okay. So
And
what?
they would be huge.
Yeah. So what happens if those things don't happen for you?
Well,
For you?
for me,
Yeah.
uh, uh, I guess really nothing, because I'm pretty much internally focused,
Hmm.
and I feel like uh, all of the joy, wisdom, power, love, happiness that exists within each of one of us, and that means it exists
Hmm.
in me too, and that it's really just about listening to myself and
Yeah.
being, I don't know, respectful
Hmm. Hmm.
of the powerful, loving, creative being. I mean,
Absolutely.
I had a friend and she has a friend who's having trouble with her son. And so I was talking about self-esteem. And I said, well, let me tell you what I learned about self-esteem. She says, well, put it on a little note to me. And I said, well, self-esteem is, and I said, and I have tried for decades to learn about self-esteem. And this is what I've come away with after more than 40 years of trying to figure out self-esteem is that with all my successes, the only thing that really raised my self-esteem is accepting my own talents and abilities. And
Mm.
and that, I'm a loving, wise being who takes every opportunity to share that loving wisdom in a way
Yeah.
that uplifts people. And I'm proud to be that person. And
Yeah.
that's what I wrote her. And so, so if it doesn't go anywhere, I'm still proud of myself,
Yeah.
even though I got, pretty much no response when I sent that book to everyone in Congress and the president.
Yeah.
It was shocking. I was so proud of myself for having done it.
There you go.
I didn't feel defeated. It was weird. I mean, I was surprised that I
Yeah.
didn't feel defeated at all. It's
Yeah.
shocking, right? But I went
Yeah.
like, good for me. I believed in myself enough to do this,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I have a phone on my phone. I have a thing that says what I want is not an outcome. And so that is something I look at every single day. So when you were talking, my first question was, what is his outcome? Right. And so when we get attached, which from this seat, I feel like you're somewhat attached to that outcome. You're the next part of your answer was like, I believe that, I'm this powerful being, and it was beautiful, beautiful, but I'm like, there's still egoic attachment to the outcome that you're going to have X, Y, and Z, because you asked me, what am I doing wrong? Right. So that was my clue for like, okay, we got egoic attachment, and it feels like you've done something wrong. You're not achieving something. You're not successful, whatever the story is. Right. And so that's why I asked, what is it that you want the outcome to be? And you got really excited, which means it's coming from your heart. And then when I asked you, what if the outcome doesn't happen? Then it sounded like you also were kind of like, I'm okay with that, but I don't know if you're totally okay with that. So that's my curiosity is, are you okay with really just falling in love with the process and writing another 15 books that maybe nobody reads, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. And you're actually just saying, I completely surrender to the source. I am one. I'm not in charge here. I'm not the doer. I'm going to surrender. Maybe the plan is that you write all these books and the only person who reads it is Scott Friedman. And that's what you're supposed to be doing on this planet, right? I don't know. And so whenever I hear people talking about, I want an outcome and it's not happening, then I know that the spiritual ego is like literally riding high and having a field day with you. Because when someone doesn't respond, then you're going to go into contraction, right? And you're going to be worried that you did something wrong. Why didn't they respond? So I don't know. How does that resonate?
100%. I mean, I am absolutely, and unfortunately, attached to the outcomes.
Exactly. Well, it's fortunate because you just said it out loud. now, now you brought awareness to it. You brought awareness to the fact that there's an attachment there. And the reason I asked you what was it the outcome that you wanted, is because this game is, every time you go for that outcome, let's pretend like the president responded to you. Well, then the ego would say, great, now I need the president of the president to respond, or whatever, right? I need more presidents to
yeah,
respond.
no, it's never
You're
enough.
never going to get there.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
never going to get there. And so I loved your answer about, like, it's when you can really believe that you're not the one that's in charge, and you can really believe that you are serving whatever purpose you're serving at this moment, and that I mean, because I've done podcasts, I haven't written a book yet, but what I notice whenever I want to create something is that the old version of me wants to create it for some sort of validation or outcome. And when I actually let that go and start to create in the now moment and just let that divine creative part of me just have fun, it's like, I don't even remember what the outcome was. And the crazy thing about like having an outcome is, you said you want the president to read it, and for all you're going to let go of that, and then it's going to be, the whole entire United Nations, right? like we think this little tiny ego thinks that we're going to control the outcome, but really, that's not what's going to happen. And so once we can really let go of that, it's like life. This life becomes so incredibly fun and joyful.
Right. And it's been a process for me. I mean, I've let go of some things, and I've let go
Yeah,
of things completely and some things not at all. And
yeah,
so it's a process. But it's interesting about the books, because I've always said I would, in the forward to my books, oftentimes I say I would never write a book I didn't feel I needed to read.
right, exactly.
'Cause, I mean, I go into meditation and I ask questions that I have, and
For
then I
you.
and then
Yep.
I answer them in the book, and so
Yep.
so I have accepted and incorporating pieces of what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I still, like, on my podcast, right? It's like, how many downloads did I get?
Exactly. It's very seductive. It's very seductive. I know. I know. And the whole social media thing, and next thing you know, you're just asking, and it's so seductive, and it's so easy, that's why I brought it up, because I feel like when you said, what are we quote unquote doing wrong, I think a lot of us get caught in the ego trap. And when I have created something, so that program that I created with my friend in Chicago, we had no outcome whatsoever. We got on the phone. What happened was, I was talking with her. We had done a course together and we met each other, never met her in person. I was talking with her. She started asking me questions. It's kind of like this dialogue, we started having all these conversations, and we did that for like 3 months. And we felt so great during, this, it was like during the lockdown. I think we met during like April of 2020. And so, or it might have been like February. It was like right around that time. It was like divine timing. And we actually did this Voxer app, which is like a walkie talkie. We would just talk back and forth. And it was so organic, and there was no attachment. And there was like, oh, what is she going to want from me? It was just like, I didn't really even know her. And all of a sudden, like we turned around and said, you know, let's just have some Tuesdays where we get together on Zoom and invite some friends. And we had 50 people on Zoom. And we're like, whoa,
Wow.
we only invited 52. You know, this is crazy. You know, I was like, wow, okay. And then we're just sitting here like, okay, we're not in charge. Like the ego saying, oh God, now you have to deliver this amazing program. And no. We're gonna sit here and we're gonna do what we do on the Voxer. We did a meditation, we talked about we've been talking about, we shared our experiences, and then, you know, next time around we had 100, and then we had 150, and we never ever had any expectation of what was going to happen. It was like the most incredible 3 years of my life, because for the first time in my life, I'd completely let go of any connection to some sort of expectation or outcome. And you know, the program ended up, I think it was like a $300,000. Like we made a lot of money, and I'm an
Well,
educator. I
how
didn't
did
plan
that,
that.
how did that work? You were inspired to do money? How?
Okay, so she was an entrepreneur. I'm an educator. So I didn't used to think like this, right? I mean, I've always worked in schools where you're a bad person. Talking about a belief system, you're a bad person if you make any money. So that had been ingrained into me as conditioned. And you know, we're just chatting and we're in this like freedom field. We're just totally liberated having these conversations. I mean, it was just so divine. And she just started saying, I think we should turn this into a program. And I said, I think you're right. But what does that even mean? And she's like, I don't know. Let's just get some people together. And she said, and then we would just, okay, we'd hang up, go and ask for guidance.
Okay.
Next day, I Voxered her and I said, 12 people, $3,000. She said, yep, that's exactly the download I got too. Like, you probably think I'm making this stuff up, right? It doesn't seem believable, but literally
Oh,
we were,
no, I do. I get
you
it.
know, right?
I get
Yeah.
it.
So we were, and then it was like, okay, let's go find the people. Well, the people are going to find us, but let's just put ourselves out there, make this practical. And so we just started doing Facebook lives, because that was where most of our interaction was, on Facebook. I just started, you know, reaching out to people. Again, I sat in meditation. I asked, who is it? Who is it this time? And she would call me and she'd say, it's Ingrid. Ingrid, do you know an Ingrid? I don't know, I'm just getting an I. And I'd say, Ingrid, oh, I know a woman named Ingrid. So I just text Ingrid and she'd say, I'll chat with you. I'd say, Ingrid, I'm making up this name. It's not a real one. I'd say, Ingrid, what are you doing? You know, she said, well, I'm depressed and I'm in my house and COVID. And I would say, well, we got a program. And she said, I'm not interested. And then she'd call me back 3 days later. And then we'd have a 3 hour conversation and say, well, how much is that? I said, 3,000. Oh, that's way too expensive. I said, well, here's the bottom line. This is not money that I'm trying to make for any reason. I'm just telling you right now that this $3,000 is going to change your life. That's what guidance told me. And so you actually have to pay 3,000, because if you pay 300, you're only going to get $300 worth out of this. This is literally going to change your life. And so they kind of be, I'm not sure. I'd say, well, don't ask your mind. Don't ask your ego. Just sit with it for a few days, just sit quietly. And then if you get a yes, and it's a full body yes, call me back. And we got 12 people in about a week of just doing that. And then from there, you know, and we kept saying to ourselves, like, don't, any kind of conventional wisdom, to use, you know, the term we used, don't follow it. You know, because we had heard these things like, oh, you don't do the $3,000 program until you have a podcast and you have 100 followers or 1,000 followers. Then you got to do this social media formula, and then you got to do this, and then you can't do that, and you can't do payment plans, whatever, right? There was just all these formulas, and we just said, we're not following any of the formulas. And again, every single moment was guided, because when we first met for those first 3 months, she said to me, what if we play this game together for the next 30 days? Anytime you have an intuitive kind of like feeling or something, act on it, and act on it right away. And so we both did that. Actually, it was like 30 days. We both did it for 30 days. And we would just, you know, mess each other and be like, okay, I just reached out to a kid from grade school. And then we'd be like, oh my God, you're not going to understand what happened. Like the week later, then this kid said this, and then I found that guy. And then it was like, oh, that person, and then that person. And then all of a sudden, like, you know, because we never were worried about the outcome. We were always falling in love with the process. Absolutely transformational. And you can imagine, as you imagine, the people that were in the program, their life completely changed.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. No,
Completely changed.
that really helps. I mean, what can I say? I mean, so often, in my growth, I hear things that I knew, but I didn't really fully incorporate.
Right.
And
Yes.
it's like, and I'm listening to you, and I go, I know that. How
You
did I
know
do
this. You know
that?
all of this. Well, if you've been doing it for so long that you know all of it. And that's part of the problem, is that the ego weaponizes all your knowledge, right? And
Yeah.
and then it twists it into a spiritual sentence, and then you feel good about it. But so you got to stay, you got to stay on top of it. But yeah, it's all of it. All of it. It's not the
Yeah,
intellectual knowing's not it. It's
I
the
mean,
yeah.
when I record my podcast and I do, a lot of them, right?
All that, yeah.
And almost all of them is start out saying, this is what I've been inspired to remind myself of today.
Yes, yes. Exactly. That's all you got to do, because we're all one, right? So if you're reminding yourself, you're reminding, like this conversation right now, you're asking for yourself, but really it's for everyone who ends up listening, right? It's going to be
Oh,
exactly
absolutely.
what they need to hear. Yeah,
our issues are everybody's issues, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I have a friend that, and she says, wow, she says, we're all 99.999% the same. And then there's that
Absolutely.
like 0.01% that,
Yes.
is our unique contribution. But
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I kind of relate. So, so yeah, this is really, I mean, this has really helped me a lot. I mean, one of the things that I pride myself on is living my principles as best I can.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, I just forget. I mean, one of the things that I found that is that sometimes negative thoughts have been with me so long that it's very hard to move them from the unconscious to the conscious, because they're so familiar that
Absolutely.
it becomes the piece of junk in the garage that I was going to take out and walk past like 500 times, and now I don't see it anymore, right?
That's a great analogy. Yes. Yes.
And I think that's one of the great things about having conversations is that we can remind one another of what we already know. I mean, I always say is that when in the coaching that I do, I don't tell them you're not going to learn anything new, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out what you're doing that's working for you, so that you can be conscious of what you're doing that's working for you, so you can consciously choose to do more of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm not going to teach you anything. You already know everything,
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
So, and but I find that, I need, and one of the things that I try to do is I try to, after every coaching session, I kind of go back and say, okay, what am I going to do to take my own advice here?
Yes. 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 My coach always says, give a session, get a session. I think that's
Yeah.
the best line ever.
Yeah. So, I try now. I mean, one of the things that I'm really proud of, I'm 69 years old and I could still run around the tennis court, and I don't have to,
Nice.
I don't have to take Advil to get out there, and I, can
That's
walk
amazing.
on my own power, and, and I'm not on any drugs, and I haven't had any operations or medical difficulties or hospital stays or any of
Beautiful.
that
That's a
stuff.
testament. It's a
And I
testament.
feel like that I feel that that's
Mhm.
an advertisement for following your inner voice.
100%. Agreed. Yep.
So I'm the only guy I know that is looking forward to getting older, because I feel it lends more credibility to that point of view.
You're going to be like, look.
But I mean, it sounds good at 70, but at 106, it's really going to sound
Right. Exactly. Exactly. No, it's this story is coming, and I always just follow whatever intuition's saying. So my dad is 85 and I'm 48, he's 85, and he has a very rare form of dementia called primary progressive aphasia. I believe it's the same thing Bruce Willis has. It's like you lose your speech, and then you starts with loss of speech and ends in Alzheimer's. And every like book or thing I've read always says that kind of at some point through the progression of the disease that they will get really mean. And I was in a Facebook group where everyone was, they're so mean. My father's now had this for like almost 10 years, and he was a devout Buddhist. He followed the Tina Turner, the American Buddhist, SGI. And so he's been chanting, 2 times a day for an hour since 1984.
awesome.
And everyone always asked me, like, why isn't he mean, given that this is the number one thing that happens with this disease? And I'm like, because he's been chanting for 40 years every day for 2 hours. He's been meditating basically. So his body is, going away and his mind is going away, but his spirit is not. And so he's like the happiest he's ever been. We're all stressing out. It's like, oh, it's so hard to watch him. Oh, and it's like, oh, well, he used to be my dad and he was so strong. And now it's so hard. And I'm sure people with, parents with dementia can relate. But it's like, I always see like, wow, I'm actually seeing his true nature. Like this is, he's having fun. He's like a child. And so, yeah, I mean, meditating for 40 years, your body is able to play tennis and run around and do all these things and not have to. I play basketball with an over 40 league, and there's a lot of guys in their 60s there, and they're not talking like you, right? They have every injury imaginable, and because they've imagined it all. I'm just kidding. And they're taking a lot of medication, and something's always hurting, which I know, I'm sure that there's something like that going on with you too, but but yeah, the mindset, this type of mindset is, it doesn't really, it's a long term, it's a long game, and it's way beyond what we think it is right now, right? It's so I always tell the story about my dad, and like I said, I actually haven't told that story on a podcast, but it just, as you were talking, it came up as a really good story.
No, I think it's a great story, and that the essence of who we are never goes away.
No.
And that, you know, the more that we can, I feel, the more that we can relate to being wise, loving beings, that's really our essence and our true nature. And the more we relate to that, the more permanent it will become and evident it will become
Yep.
our experience of ourselves and our experience of the world. And
Yep.
so I think that, but so as a question for you,
Yeah.
as somebody that is really supporting leaders who, I mean, I read through, a bunch of stuff on your website and stuff,
Yeah.
who, it sounds like, that you support people who want to make a contribution in the world. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, that contribution in the world is maximized if they're not attached to it.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Absolutely.
and I mean, and that's kind of where I've gotten is that, okay, well, I'm just going to be me. And that if I'm supposed
Yep.
to, influence leaders, then, if that's in the cards, then it'll show
Yeah.
up at my doorstep. It's not for me
Exactly.
banging the doors down.
No, yeah, I 100% agree. And I feel like for me, it's always a question of where is it coming from? So like when I decided to support leaders, it was so intuitively guided. It was like, when I said I was sitting around there meditating all the time, I kept getting leadership. And I just, it's hard to go from the formless to the form. You're like, well, how do I put this together? And people that have watched me over the last couple of years, because I think I've probably modeled this the best the last like 2 or 3 years, they're like, you have a new kind of thing like every 6 months. And I'm like, well, because I'm just following the guidance. And so it doesn't seem very logical to go from like, oh, I'm starting this business to that business. But for me, it went from like supporting leaders. I'll tell you how it kind of all coalesced, and how when you just follow the guidance and kind of like just ask yourself, is it coming from the ego or is it coming from the heart? And so it started with me around coaching all these people, right, that happen to be leaders. So out of I think we had like 50, that joined this ended up being 6-9 months a year. Some of them came for stayed for 2, but the core group of probably like 40 or 50 people, they, most of them were half of them were some type of like formal leader, like a person at Google or an executive. And then we had the other half that would not have gotten that type of respect, right? Like stay-at-home mom, which I believe is, she's total leader, right? So we had all different types of people. We had a rocket scientist, we had a doctor, we had all these different people. And when we came into that Zoom, it was like nobody cared, whether you were educated or not educated or where, but what, so I went from doing that, which was kind of like, oh, I think, and I didn't even realize, I'm like, oh, I'm doing the leadership thing, right? Again, because I wasn't trying. It was just, I was just following this.
Right.
I'm
Right.
like, oh, I'm actually serving a rocket scientist and a doctor and a lawyer and an executive. And I had no idea. And then I was like, oh, that's the leadership thing. And then I went from there to, okay, now I feel like I'm getting back in the education space because I had been, that's where my career, my kind of professional world is. So I started doing that again. And I started consulting with like principals and school superintendents. I'd always end up starting with they'd be like, oh, what are my goals and my strategic priorities? And we'd always have that conversation for like maybe 2 sessions, 3 sessions. And by session 4, it was, oh my God, I'm so depressed, or oh, this is all facade. I had a terrible childhood, whatever it might have been. I didn't say anything to bring that out, but it's just the energy of sitting
Right.
with them, holding the space, and just the mirror of what I'm showing them. And so we'd get these really deep conversations, which would transform their leadership. So I did that for a while. And then it was like, okay, now I'm helping people like that open schools. And it was like these really cool new micro schools, which I didn't know anything about. But 7 years ago, I saw it very clearly in a meditation that I was going to have some role with these like grassroots schools. And it's like, oh, maybe that's that. I've been seeing that for 7 years. And so I started following that breadcrumb. And then, so like in the last 2 years, I think I've switched my LinkedIn, 4 times. Like I was a coach and now I'm doing this. And then I was doing that. And now as a consultant, people are always like, you're always kind of switching it around, and they're so confused by it. I'm like, well, because I'm not on a linear path. But then everything came together, and I like had this moment where I'm like, oh, now I'm helping people open micro schools in their community, their leaders, and we're having a curriculum that's all about mind, body, and spirit. I'm like, oh, okay. Now my logical mind can land this plane. But the last 3 years, right? The last 3 years, there was no logic to it. It was just follow your heart, follow your heart. And I asked myself every day, like, am I following my heart, or am I following an outcome, or am I following the ego, or am I following some sort of validation from the outside? And if there's even like a small inkling of that, I'm like, don't do it. Just go back and wait a week or wait a day. And if I have this thing that fell on the floor, and right before, no coincidence, right before I got on it, fell on the floor, but it just says heart messages, and I just put post-it notes up there. So it reminds me, if I look at it and I'm like, oh, that's not in line. Like this idea I just had, that doesn't feel like it's coming from the heart. It feels like it's coming from the head. And so I just let that one go. And then I wait for the heart message. I put it up there, and then I can move all the post-it notes around, and I can see how they all fit together, and, the discernment process and taking the formless to the form. But yeah, you really don't know what's going to happen. And so when I work with these leaders, I don't have an agenda. I'm really, really open. And the funny thing is, the moment they turn on the Zoom, I know exactly what's going to be about. It usually happens in 2 seconds. It'll be like, oh, okay, this person needs to work on their childhood trauma. Oh, this person, it's like I get the download the moment they turn on the Zoom in the first few seconds. And I'm like, okay, just go through it. And sometimes you got to play the game. Like if I have an executive that's paying me $500 an hour, they do not want to talk about their inner child, right?
Yeah.
But after we sit there and we talk about our families, and they share this and they share that, by like I said, by 3, 4, 5 sessions in, there's like, they don't even realize they're talking about their inner child, and they didn't know they were supposed to. And I'm like, well, and then sometimes I'll tell them, I'll just kind of read, some people don't want to hear anything about this. Other people are really open to it. And then I'll just play around with whatever they're open to. And I'll just kind of play the game with them, and I'll watch them transform in front of my eyes. And I have no expectation whatsoever. And I even tell them from the beginning, if you have any expectations for this after a certain amount of time, I'm not the right person for you, because then we're going to change the whole dynamic, because you're going to want something by session 4. And this is not about that. This is going to be an organic process, and we're going to just trust that it's going to unfold exactly as it should.
Yeah, I can tell you that, when I do coaching, I do the same thing. I'm like,
I believe it. Yeah, I'm sure you do.
and I tell people, I says, look, the way it goes is I'm just present, and I take a breath, and whatever happens, happens, and what doesn't happen, doesn't happen.
Exactly.
And it's always the best thing. But I help them. I mean, that's one of the things I do in my coaching is I help people identify times in their life when they're really present.
Yes, that's
And how magical that works for her. I was coaching this one person who had a spasm in her neck so bad she couldn't work and nothing. And I said, well, tell me about your last week since I saw you last. She said, oh yeah, well, we had a family get together, and I was telling you,
there it is.
so wonderful. I was
Ding, ding, ding.
I said, tell me, when you were talking to your uncle, did your neck hurt? She goes, no, I forgot about it completely. I said, you were in the present moment enjoying yourself.
Yes.
And there is no pain then. And then, and then I had another friend, and I says, I've seen you in meetings, and it's like you just say the right thing at the right time,
Yep.
and what I want you to do is I want you to go back and ask yourself, at that moment when those words came out of my mouth, ask yourself, were you thinking about what you were going to say or should say?
Exactly.
He said, no, not at all. I was just in the present, and it came out, and I go, there you
It's
go.
amazing.
That's what you want to do. you're already
Exactly.
doing it. You just need, and so it's just helping people understand how to tap into, or actually recognize how they're already tapping into
Exactly.
their own wisdom, and the fact that um, when you're having a great time, there is no pain, there is no suffering.
No pain,
It's
no
not there.
suffering.
It doesn't exist.
Absolutely. It's so true.
You know.
It's so true. Which
And
is why, back to your original question, it's like if none of those things happen with the letters and all of that, I mean, literally the story you just told, if that's what you're doing, to me, that's incredibly meaningful. And so there's some sort of story that it has to be, more high status or something, but it's it's incredibly meaningful, whatever you're doing, for people that are listening. If you're in the present moment, and whatever it is that you're doing, if it's like sitting there and looking at a tree, and now all of a sudden, your neighbor next door, it feels something different because you sat there and looked at that tree. I mean, we're practical here, so I'm very male. Like, I'm like, well, actually, I want you to do something. But it actually could just be something as simple as looking at a tree, right? Or meditating. But it's like that's the power of this work. And so whether people are really validating it or responding to your letters, it's only significant if the guidance has told you, oh no, you're supposed to have like people responding to the letters, because that's part of the purpose here. That's part of the unfolding, right?
now that's a question I haven't asked.
There you go.
That is a great, great question, because I mean, just through the course of our conversation, I feel that I've gotten better at being able to just uh, incorporate what I've been saying a lot, is that the joy of expressing who I am as payment in full.
Bingo. Which 97% of the population can't say, so you're already doing a lot better.
And so but it's like, but I do find myself keep come back and say, well, I got bills to pay, and I'm a
I know.
mortgage,
I know. Exactly.
but and then in my meditation I get, yeah, and you had a mortgage for like 30 years, and you've always made your payments on time, and you have perfect credit, and you have money in the bank, and it's all worked out, and it's going to continue to work out. And there was this one story where I was really up against it financially, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, and I said, well, I'm not going to give up on myself. I've done that before, and I know that's a losing proposition. So I'm going to just continue to focus on the light and
Yeah.
meditate, and
Yeah.
do what I get in meditation. And if I'm on the street, I'm on the street. And I went from being maxed out 100,000 plus on credit card debt and everything else, and not having money for anything,
Yeah.
to all my debt was paid off, and I had $50,000 cash in the bank and no tax liability in the space of 3 days.
I absolutely, like I said, you feel like this is not true, but I absolutely believe it. Right. Like, I know it's true, but it doesn't seem
And it was
logical.
like,
Yeah.
and in the meantime, I healed my relationship with my parents.
There you go.
As an extra benefit, right? I mean, I know it was, and so it's like,
Mhm.
they always say, and they're right. I mean, we all believe 100% of what we experience, and so I take that experience around with me.
Exactly.
And oftentimes, in meditation, I'll be reminded of that experience. It says, well, remember that, I mean, you just
Yeah.
it's like, all you have to do is not give up on yourself,
Yes. Yes.
and I can't tell you, I mean, the number of times that I've felt like giving up on myself are like too many to count. It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I did it. I remember the last time I gave up on myself, and it was, I don't know, 35 years ago or so. And I told myself that I would way rather die than ever go through that again.
Mm.
It took me 3 years,
Powerful.
kind of recover and stuff. And I
Yeah.
knew that, like, next time would be worse. And
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, you know what? Hey, if I go down doing the right thing, then I go down doing the right thing as best I can discern what it is.
Absolutely.
But giving up on myself is not the right thing. And I just need to hang in there. And I mean, and one point, this was 1997, I set a goal to survive the next 3 minutes. I mean, that was sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
the level of pressure I was feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, what I've really been leaning into is, can you really believe that? I know we have these spiritual principles, like everything happens for a reason and everything happens for me, but can you really, really believe that? And that's the thing I've been really leaning into. Like, there is no good or bad. Everything's happening for the greatest, my greatest evolution. And so, like that story of 35 years ago, it's like you said, now you say that with so much conviction. Like, I'm not giving up on myself again. Right. And so you had to go through that. And so at the time, you're probably like, this is terrible. There's no, you can't tell me this isn't bad. Right. But now you're kind of like, oh, that's probably, one of the best things, that one of the best lessons I ever learned. So I've been really leaning into that belief of just like, oh, okay, this is what's happening right now. And there's a lesson for me. And now let's maybe figure out the lesson, not from the head, but from the heart, and walk through it and see if next time it comes around, because it's going to come around over and over and over again in a different way. I'm going to say, okay, I recognize this lesson. I know this pretty well. So I'm going to try and just navigate it a little bit differently than last time, and continue to love yourself and not judge yourself, and just be like, okay, that's happening now. Oh, I wonder what that's happening for. Oh, okay. Just, isn't that interesting? One of the teachers I follow, she always says, just say, isn't that interesting? Just, isn't that interesting? Just ask that question.
One of the things that tools that I've stumbled across, I'll say,
Yeah.
because, and again, it sounds so silly to think it's a big deal because it's in some ways so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I have found that by being accepting in as much detail as I can be,
Mm-hmm.
it's the most efficient way for me to move forward. And it's like, if I'm, it's like, oh, I wasn't really thinking about it, that thing in that detail before. And now that I'm aware of that, that's how I'm thinking about it.
Mm.
I don't think the same about it anymore.
Okay, interesting.
And it's really just, okay, I'll sit down and I say, what's going on right now? I said, well, I'm having this response to this situation. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'll remind myself, well, I get to choose what response I'm having to this situation. And in this case, I
Yep.
thought that I have a choice about how I'm going to respond to the situation.
Yes.
By being more articulate when I'm writing it down,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
This is a situation and I'm angry about it. Oh,
Yep.
I'm responding to this situation with anger. I have
Yep.
a choice. I could respond to it differently.
Yep.
What are three other choices I have
Yes.
how to respond to this? And then I'll write down those three choices, and then I'm gonna pick the one I want.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's really been something that has been an increasing part of my meditation practice, is to try to be as articulate as I can and writing down exactly where I'm at right now with my thinking
Yes.
and with my physical situation and
Yeah.
basically anything that comes up for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have to have really good tools for navigating all the different things that happen. I mean, this is daily life. And we would always say that in my, I mean, and so now I have this program called the Wise Warrior, which is kind of like an offshoot that I do. I don't do it with my friend anymore, but I do it by myself. And it's something that we always talk about. It's just kind of, can you really just see it as one step at a time, and like the daily, I call it the wise work, because it's the daily work of, can you implement this daily and like moment by moment, right? And so your point of, okay, I'm getting triggered, I'm having a catalyst, I'm getting angry, whatever it may be, can I actually navigate that in this moment? And you just have to find whatever tools work best for you. You got to practice.
Yeah, and that's, one of the things that I'm really happy about are the efficacy of the tools that I've found for myself.
Yes.
Like, uh, I can go into the day with more confidence.
Yeah.
I actually believe that I have the tools to deal with whatever happens.
Yes.
I know what's going to happen, but
Yeah, but you have the tools.
I have the tools to deal with it.
Yes. And that knowing right there, that helps you fall in love with the process. Because
Yeah.
part of the whole thing of like wanting to get an outcome is that it's like that part of us that wants to be safe. So we think we can control it. Like, if I do this and that's going to happen. But by being able to do that, you're kind of, you're saying, oh, I know I have the tools to deal with whatever happens. I'm just going to go into this process just wide open, eyes wide open, and see what happens. And we'll see if the outcome I thought was going to happen is actually going to happen. But if I get thrown off, I know that I have the tools to make it through.
Right, right. That yeah, and within my basket of tools, thank God, are lots and lots and lots of friendships with
I was
really,
going to say community. Yeah. The right people.
really, I called up this one guy, and this is several years back, but I said, I've tried everything I can think of to get back to center, and it's just not happening. I mean,
Yeah.
can I buy you dinner, and can you just like spend some time with me and help me and stuff? And
Yeah.
he says, well, I just put two steaks on the grill for my wife. I'm going to take them off, and I'll be there in 5 minutes.
Amazing.
Like, oh my God, it's like, how great is that, right?
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. And good for you for asking, right? That's another thing that's impressive.
Yeah,
You knew you needed to ask for help. Because I think sometimes we get confused in the spiritual world that you're supposed to just, oh, I'm just, everything's within me. So I don't need to ever ask for help, which is technically true, but you need the human support. You got to ask for help when it's time.
yeah, and that's one of the things that I've found that a lot of the really love and joy that gets expressed in the world is people giving and receiving help.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
whenever I see an opportunity to really help somebody, I just jump all over it because I feel so uplifted by,
Yes.
when I'm able to share with someone about, try this with your teenager, see what it does.
Yes. Absolutely. And if you can really believe that giving and receiving are basically the same thing,
Yeah.
that's the best thing ever, right? Because like you said, why would I ever ask if I want to give? I want to give, I want to receive. I mean, most of us, like you and me, that are coaches and that are helping people, we're actually really bad at receiving. That's the part that we need to work on.
And I have been working. One year, I told a friend of mine, I says, the best accomplishment I did last year was I was able to receive help from you. And it was really hard.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's hard for us. We'll give and give and give and give and give. But when somebody's like, my wife will be like, can you just receive something? I'm like, oh, sorry. Yes, I will. Yes, I'm open to receive. I'm open to receive. It's the same thing. Giving and receiving is the same thing.
Well,
Yes.
it took me a long time before I could respond to compliments by just
Mhm.
saying thank you.
Thank you.
Right? I used to deflect it and say yes, but I was the master of the yes, but and it's been a number of years now, but I remember the first time I was like, what, just say thank you and take it in for heaven's
Yes.
sakes.
Yes. It's the best advice ever. You had me shifting in my chair at the very beginning because you said something complimentary, like, "Oh, you're doing a lot of great work," and I wanted to say something, and I shifted and I said, thank you." I just don't say anything else, except receive what he's saying and just
Absolutely.
leave it there.
No, I think that, it really is, and I mean, and one of the things that is, I'm taking away from our conversation is that a deeper understanding of the fact that the best thing I can do for the world is work on myself.
Yeah,
When I met my wife more than 40 years ago, or around 40 years ago,
yeah,
I started meditating on, well, what could I do to best support her? And I've asked that question constantly throughout our marriage. And I have got one and only one answer over the 37 years we've been married, which is work on yourself.
yeah.
Yeah. Dude, look at that. Needs work. And, but every year I understand in greater depth why that's true and the
Mhm.
specifics of how that's true and stuff. And every year I'm able to, find ways to tell her I'm proud of her that are more impactful
Yes.
and that I'm able to just draw her out and just, be accepting of what she says and not try and solve the problem. Just be
Yes.
accepted.
Yes.
And just, so much, I've had to learn and I'm, In some areas I'm a quick learner, and some not so
True for all of us. True for all of us.
much. But you know, but I realize now that I need to take that to all of the inspiration that I've had about how to make the world a better place, like what we were talking about before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, well, the best contribution I can make is to work on myself. And if that's meant to be and part of that,
Yeah.
it will be. And if it's not, it won't be. And
Yeah.
but by the more attached I am to that outcome, the more I'm inhibiting the possibility of that outcome.
Absolutely. That's a good way of putting it.
So with that understanding, I feel like, okay, you know, I'm another step closer to having the level of detachment with that that is healthy.
Yes. That's a great summary. Great summary. And I learned a lot today too. So it's been really fun. It was reminded, well, like we said, we already know it's all within us. It's everything in spiritual truths are contradictions, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
we know nothing.
I always say is that, you know, I mean, a tool is a good tool for as long as you need the tool. And then when you don't need the tool, you don't need the tool anymore.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, this has been great. I've really, it's been very enjoyable and uplifting. And I really believe that people that watch this video will be inspired in really beneficial ways, which is also good.
That's awesome. Well, I asked every single day, how can I serve? And one of the answers was go talk with Scott. So glad that I was able to value today.
Well, any thoughts that you want to finish up with or tell people how to contact you if they're so inspired or
Yeah,
anything?
easiest way to find me is davidkrichards.com. So just my name with the middle initial K. And you can email me at david@davidkrichards.com. And, you know, I close every podcast with the same thing, which is trust yourself. You know, if you go to my website, you'll see that's my number one message in life is trust yourself. And like I said, in my 30-day fun thing with my friend, we just trusted ourselves for 30 days straight, unequivocally. And it was like, whoa, everything was totally, our life was never, it was the most enjoyable life ever. And I've kind of taken that little bit of joy and tried to bring it into my life every day. So yeah, just trust yourself, trust yourself. And when I say yourself, I'm talking about the timeless, eternal self with a capital S. Trust that part of you. Like you said, the inner guidance is never wrong, even though you think it may be. Oh, that seems wrong. It's like, okay, that's what your mind is thinking, but it's always right. So just trust it. And I don't even acting on it as a whole nother lesson. I'm just saying, trust it. That's what I'm asking you to do.
Well, that's awesome. All right. Let me see if I can get the computer skills to wrap this up. Stop recording. Here we are.